if you've been a sentient human being in Rhode Island in the last 15 years, you have to read this book because everything is in there. It is almost biblical in nature.
Actually, though, Pat, everything is not in there. I had to leave a lot of stuff out.
Oh, boy.
But
My God.
Is there an unrated version going to hit pay-per-view?
We were at the point where we were thinking we're going to have to go to 2 volumes, and I said, we can't do that.
Oh, for the love of God.
So, I mean, the whole traffic court scandal is not in there.
That's right. It's not. Wow.
Hey, what's 40 million amongst friends? And you know, whatever happened, I mean, all right, let's take that just for a second. I mean, that guy Leo Scanlon, I mean, you know, he can't, whatever happened to him after that? Oh, that's right, he's the executive director for the Speaker of the House of the state of Rhode Island.
That's right.
Yeah.
No revolving door here. But getting back to the...
Well, it's a revolving door from their offices to courthouses and prisons.
And then back. And then back. Don't cry for me, Gordon Fox. He will be back. The book is remarkable. The book starts out in the earliest days of your tenure here as a citizen of Little Rhodey. We talked a little bit about the intro, how you were looking for a job, and as Providence would have it, literally, you came together with Common Cause. Now, again, talk about Common Cause as an operation at that time, how it had several executive directors, hardworking folks, I'm sure, but it had gone through a little bit of its own revolving door. It was a very basic operation, and yet you managed to bring it, you and Ray Condon, who you talk about effusively in the book, and her role in really steering you through. That parallels really the rise of the quote-unquote ethics commission in this state, and the history of the two of them are really inseparable. So give us a snapshot of Little Rhodey back in those days. It was kind of a toddling town, wasn't it?
It was a problem. I mean, people didn't know in the 80s about the RISDIC thing, and probably a lot of your listeners don't. Some of my students, one of them said to me, "Oh, that RISDIC. I was only 8 years old, so I really don't remember." My mother
stole my newspaper route money.
He said my mother was just crazy about that because all of her money was tied up. She was a single mother or divorced. But so RISDIC was the legislature's protection of Rhode Island's homegrown credit unions. When we came here and tried to get a mortgage, a realtor took us to what was then the East Providence Credit Union. And my wife looked at, she's smarter than I am, she looked at the sign on the door, it's RASDIC. What is this? She said, what about FDIC? And Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation. And he said, oh, this is the way we do it in Rhode Island. Well, what we found out very soon was that the vice chair of the House Finance Committee, Bob Bianchini, was also the executive director of the Rhode Island Credit Union League, which was the trade association for the credit unions. And over the years, they had done a lot of things, and I like Bob, a lot of things with good intentions, but they had opened it up to commercial loans. They had there was a lot of insider stuff. There was some mob money getting laundered through some of the credit unions, and they had a report in 1986. Arlene Violet, when she was elected Attorney General, hired didn't hire, it was $1 a year, a retired banking executive named Bob Stitt and a guy named Charles Black. They studied and they said, this is going to collapse. This whole system is rife for failure. It has happened in Maryland and another state. And the House Finance Committee took everybody, Bob Bianchini and Peter Navola, who was the head of the RISDIC credit unions, took everybody to the Aurora Club for dinner, and they said, we got to kill this thing. And sure enough, they did. And Governor DePrete had 5 warnings that RISDIC was about to collapse, and he did nothing because he was taking money hand over fist from the RISDIC credit unions. And then it happened in the very end of
Governor 91, right?
On January 1, 1991, Bruce Sunland was sworn in as governor. He went inside, he signed an order on ethics, and then he signed a second order that closed all the credit unions. And it was crazy. It was wild. And people couldn't get their money. A third of the people in the state were locked out of their money.
Well, 2 questions. First off, and there's a common day application to people's reaction to RISDIC collapse that we like to evoke here in the show, and I'll ask you about that in a second. But my first question is, you spin a remarkable tale about Mr. Bianchini. In the absence of a truly enabled ethics commission, an investigation was essentially thwarted that might have, in its own way, prevented the implosion of RISD. And if you could tell, because
or
really
at least lessen the impact.
Right. There's it's a snapshot of really how things worked and continue to work on some levels of the state. You could tell us about that.
You're from Cumberland, aren't you?
Yes, sir.
Robert Bergeron, was the head of the Woodlawn Credit Union, and they were a member of RISD, and he was troubled by this and tried to persuade them to go for federal credit union insurance. So he's kind of started this. Anyway, they shut it down. What I described before, they killed the bill. Frank Gashin from Cumberland was the sponsor, and there was a Senate bill as well. Bergeron filed an ethics complaint against Bob Bianchini. It was called a conflict of interest complaint at that point because it was under the old conflict of interest law before the Ethics Commission was formed. But they had to have 5 votes out of 9 to find a violation. They got 4, and so Bianchini was exonerated. But ironically, one of the members of the Ethics Commission who voted to exonerate him was Michael Morey, who was the president of the Warwick Municipal Employees Credit Union. So you talk about conflicts of interest. So we had conflicts of interest even on the commission that was supposed to be regulating ethics.
Now, at the same time, you were essentially hamstrung, or I'm sorry, your predecessors were hamstrung by the absence of any disclosure laws. I mean, these tribal proceedings took place in secret. So not only did you not know that they were going on in a sense, but you literally wouldn't know what the reaction to them was.
The law said that anybody who was accused of an ethics violation or conflict of interest, that had to be done in secret. And when we filed the complaint against Ed DePreet, the whole thing was behind closed doors. There are a couple chapters in my book where I have gone through the transcript in my own notes. And so you can see for the first time, because DePreet eventually pled guilty, and so there's no record, no judicial record of what actually happened. Well, here you can see spelled out the way that he was sending the lists, so getting the lists and indicating his preference, and
right.
All that stuff has never come out, although it's in the book. But the point was, the Ethics Commission process itself was cloaked with secrecy. If you robbed a bank, I'm looking at you. You're not a typical bank robber. But if you robbed a bank, your trial would be in open court. But if you caused the downfall of the credit union
robbed
system,
from every person in the state at the same time.
And it really did.
Yeah.
It was all behind closed doors. Tragic.
In fact, one of the anecdotes that's so fascinating, you talk about a multi-part series that took roundtable conversations that took place between politicians, and I believe it might have been on public TV, with Common Cause, talking about the need to enforce ethics rules, which DePreet participated in simultaneously. Literally, you could almost argue that after the show, he went dumpster diving at Waltz. It's that kind of that ability of a Rhode Island politician to look you square in the eye and patronize you with the type of pablum that's still coming from the Raimondo administration and some of the people who followed DePreet. And yet at the same time, while it was going on, he was robbing the state blind, wasn't he?
Well, he wasn't robbing the state blind, and it's interesting. I interviewed Ed DePreet for this book. Mm-hmm. He friended me on LinkedIn or whatever, one of those, and so
that must have been awkward.
Well, so I said sure, and then I sent him an email and I said, "May I come and interview you?" I spent about more than 2 hours with him in his house in Cranston. I feel very sorry for him. I mean, I think he honestly doesn't believe he did anything worse than previous governors. I think he honestly doesn't believe he did anything wrong, but he did. And that's the problem.
Yeah.
It's so embedded in the culture. It's in the DNA.
Yeah.
Right. Well, no worse than what anybody else did. Why am I being vilified? Why am I being brought up on charges? I mean, the last guy did X, Y, Z, and why are they coming down on me?
That's what he said.
Yeah.
But the interesting thing is we've come a long way, and I don't want to be just negative about this. We've gotten a lot of laws passed because the people stood together and demanded change. we now have the strongest ethics commission in the United States, bar none, and I can talk about the details of that if you wish. Its authority affirmed by the Supreme Court in 1992 and 1993 and not undercut in that way since then, although one real problem that the legislature has been exempted through a terrible ruling in what's called the Irons decision in 2009.
A little general.
And it is terribly frustrating to me that the leadership of the House and the Senate, both Teresa Paiva-Weed, their Senate president, and Nicholas Mattiello, the House Speaker, have refused to deal with this. And it's been now 6 years. Yeah. And so if there's anything that I hope your listeners will get riled up about and go to them, and coalition is a good name. We need a coalition to come together and say we demand that the legislature be under this ethics commission. Yeah. Everybody from the building inspectors to the health inspectors to
all of your local officials, town city councils, mayors.
All of them are underneath the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission. The legislature is exempted, and it's wrong. And what Common Cause, John Marion, my successor, has done very well is to document the fact that where they used to sign little statements and they say, I can't vote on this. It would go in the House or Senate Journal. Say, I can't vote on this because I have a conflict of interest. They didn't have to say what it was, but they had to say, I have a conflict. They've stopped doing it. It's dropped off the table. And so people have got to say to them, you must restore the jurisdiction of the Ethics Commission. The only way that can happen now is with an amendment that the people have to vote on. So they've got 2016 is coming up. They've got to do it in the 2016 legislative session.
Now, the media obviously plays a huge role in this. And what to me is fascinating is there is a notion now that people look back with rose-colored glasses to the 70s, 80s, and 90s and say, boy, I wish the Journal was as tough now as they were then. And after reading your book, it becomes apparent to me that there's a dichotomy, there's a split. There's two faces to the Providence Journal. Yes, there was a tremendous history in the 80s, 70s, 80s, 90s of investigative reporting. Many of these folks refer to the Journal as almost the AAA of the New York Times and the Washington Post, and many people went on to successful careers there. But it's clear, in looking back at the history, as you portray it, that the Providence Editorial Board, Providence Journal Editorial Board, to this day has had a split personality and has actively worked to oppose a lot of the ethics reforms that you folks tried to get in force. And that seems to be true. A lot of the issues that surrounded the Constitutional Convention and the Ethics Board itself, that they openly opposed and actually helped swing the election against some of the more stronger.
Well, actually, though, they did come out in the end for the Constitutional Convention. And Ed Acorn, who's now the editorial pages editor, when he came in 1999, we went and had lunch with him. Peter Hofstetter, our research director, and I, and we showed him a lot of stuff. And he went to work on separation of powers. And he became one of the most effective advocates you could imagine, and they've been very strong on restoring the Ethics Commission's jurisdiction.
So I'm talking back the original the original legislation that was sponsored back as a result of the first Constitutional Convention. I mean, it seems.
You're exactly right. Back in the 80s, they opposed the Ethics Commission and a bunch of other things, and I was stunned. I wrote when I wrote the complaint against Ed DePrete because it was editorial. It was on the street journalists who did the research and were revealing all this stuff. And here I was writing the complaint, and lo and behold, the Providence Journal editorial board said, well, DePrete has acknowledged some mistakes and vote for him. Right. And sure enough, I thought, this is crazy.
Well, again, you have this history of the Providence Journal. And I'm not here to beat up on the Journal this week, but the Journal's got a long-standing tradition of that. I mean, what I love about this is the constancy between what happened in the 70s, 80s, 90s and what's going on now. The Providence Journal had an opportunity to endorse Dawson Hodgson in the last go-around of executive roles and chose to just stay out of that completely. They had a chance to take on David Cicilline because of all the financial problems that were being buried in his first campaign at Congress, and they chose to endorse him. It strikes me that the editorial board tries to portray themselves as being the grand salons of Rhode Island, yet many times they've exhibited a real cowardice when it comes to going to bat for the people of Rhode Island.
I would say that nobody gets it right all the time. In fact, most I have a couple of places in the book where I've confessed that I've made some pretty serious mistakes along the way. I've seen serious mistakes from almost everybody else that I know, and that's the reality. You're a Methodist. You say it's the core of